parts. They are very comfortable in snowy weather, and keep the feet very warm; but you require several wrappings of cloth round the feet before you put them on. I wore a beautiful pair all last winter, worked with porcupine quills, and bound with scarlet ribbon. These elegant mocassins were the handicraft of an old squaw, the wife of Peter the hunter; you have already heard of him in my former letters. I was delighted with a curious specimen of Indian orthography that accompanied the mocassins in the form of a note, which I shall transcribe for your edification: "Sir, please if you would give something, you must git in order in store is worth, them mocassin, porcupine quill on et, $1 4 yard." This curious billet was the production of the hunter's eldest son, and is meant to intimate that if I would buy the mocassins the price was $1, or an order on one of the stores for 4 yards of calico, for so the squaw interpreted its meaning. The order for 4 yards of printed cotton was delivered over to Mrs. Peter, who carefully pinned it within the folds of her blanket, and departed well satisfied with the payment. And this reminds me of our visit to the Indians' camp last week. Feeling some desire to see these singular people in their winter encampment, I expressed my wish to S , who happens to be a grand favourite with the old hunter and his family. As a mark of distinction, they have bestowed on him the title of Chippewa, the name of their tribe. He was delighted with the opportunity of doing the honours of the Indian wigwam, and it was agreed that he, with some of his brothers and sisters in law, who happened to be on a visit at his house, should come and drink tea with us and accompany us to the camp in the woods. A merry party we were that sallied forth that evening into the glorious starlight. The snow sparkled with 1,000 diamonds on its frozen surface, over which we bounded with hearts as light as hearts could be in this careful wood; and truly never did I look upon a lovelier sight than the woods presented. There had been a heavy fall of snow the preceding day. Owing to the extreme stillness of the air, not a particle of it had been shaken from the trees. The evergreens were bending beneath their brilliant burden. Every twig, every leaf and spray was covered, and some of the weak saplings actually bowed down to the earth with the weight of the snow, forming the most lovely and fanciful bowers and arcades across our path. As you looked up towards the tops of the trees, the snowy branches, seen against the deep blue sky, formed a silvery veil, through which the bright stars were gleaming with a chastened brilliancy. I was always an admirer of a snowy landscape, but neither in this country nor at home did I ever see anything so surpassingly lovely as the forest appeared that night. Leaving the broad road, we struck into a by path, deep tracked by the Indians, and soon perceived the wigwam by the red smoke that issued from the open basket work top of the little hut. This is first formed with light poles, planted round so as to enclose a circle of 10 or 12 feet in diameter. Between these poles are drawn large sheets of birch bark both within and without, leaving an opening of the bare poles at the top so as to form an outlet for the smoke. The outer walls were also banked up with snow, so as to exclude the air entirely from beneath. Some of our party, who were younger and lighter of foot than we sober married folks, ran on before, so that when the blanket that served the purpose of a door was unfastened, we found a motley group of the dark skins and the pale faces reposing on the blankets and skins that were spread round the walls of the wigwam. The swarthy complexions, shaggy black hair, and singular costume of the Indians formed a striking contrast with the fair faced Europeans that were mingled with them, seen as they were by the red and fitful glare of the wood fire that occupied the centre of the circle. The deer hounds lay stretched in indolent enjoyment close to the embers, while 3 or 4 dark skinned little urchins were playing with each other, or angrily screaming out their indignation against the apish tricks of the hunchback, my old acquaintance, Maquin, that Indian flibbertigibbet, whose delight appeared to be in teasing and tormenting the little papooses, casting as he did so sidelong glances of impish glee at the guests, while as quick as thought his features assumed an impenetrable gravity when the eyes of his father or the squaws seemed directed towards his tricks. There was a slight bustle among the party when we entered one by one through the low blanket doorway. The merry laugh rang round among our friends, which was echoed by more than one of the Indian men, and joined by the peculiar half laugh or chuckle of the squaws. Chippewa was directed to a post of honour beside the hunter Peter, and Squaw Peter, with an air of great good humour, made room for me on a corner of her own blanket, to effect which two papooses and a hound were sent lamenting to the neighbourhood of the hunchback Maquin. The most attractive persons in the wigwam were two Indian girls, one about 18, Jane, the hunter's eldest daughter, and her cousin Margaret. I was greatly struck with the beauty of Jane. Her features were positively fine, and though of gipsy darkness, the tint of vermilion on her cheek and lip rendered it, if not beautiful, very attractive. Her hair, which was of jetty blackness, was soft and shining, and was neatly folded over her forehead, not hanging loose and disorderly in shaggy masses, as is generally the case with the squaws. Jane was evidently aware of her superior charms, and may be considered as an Indian belle, by the peculiar care she displayed in the arrangement of the black cloth mantle, bound with scarlet, that was gracefully wrapped over one shoulder, and fastened at her left side with a gilt brooch. Margaret was younger, of lower stature, and though lively and rather pretty, yet wanted the quiet dignity of her cousin. She had more of the squaw in face and figure. The two girls occupied a blanket by themselves, and were busily engaged in working some most elegant sheaths of deer skin, richly wrought over with coloured quills and beads. They kept the beads and quills in a small tin baking pan on their knees; but my old squaw, as I always call Mrs. Peter, held her porcupine quills in her mouth, and the fine dried sinews of the deer, which they make use of instead of thread in work of this sort, in her bosom. On my expressing a desire to have some of the porcupine quills, she gave me a few of different colour that she was working a pair of moccasins with, but signified that she wanted bead to work moccasin, by which I understood I was to give some in exchange for the quills. Indians never give since they have learned to trade with white men. She was greatly delighted with the praises I bestowed on Jane. She told me Jane was soon to marry the young Indian who sat on one side of her, in all the pride of a new blanket coat, red sash, embroidered powder pouch, and great gilt clasps to the collar of his coat, which looked as warm and as white as newly washed fleece. The old squaw evidently felt proud of the young couple as she gazed on them, and often repeated with a good tempered laugh, "Jane's husband marry by and by." We had so often listened with pleasure to the Indians singing their hymns of a Sunday night, that I requested some of them to sing to us. The old hunter nodded assent, and, without removing his pipe, with the gravity and phlegm of a Dutchman, issued his commands, which were as instantly obeyed by the younger part of the community, and a chorus of rich voices filled the little hut with a melody that thrilled to our very hearts. The hymn was sung in the Indian tongue, a language that is peculiarly sweet and soft in its cadences, and seems to be composed with many vowels. I could not but notice the modest air of the girls, as if anxious to avoid observation that they felt was attracted by their sweet voices. They turned away from the gaze of the strangers, facing each other, and bending their heads down over the work they still held in their hands. The attitude, which is that of the eastern nations, the dress, dark hair and eyes, the olive complexion, heightened colour, and meek expression of face, would have formed a study for the painter. I wish you could have witnessed the scene. I think you would not easily have forgotten it. I was pleased with the air.